Core?
I was actually on the course of study committee. I was chosen by the state board and approved to serve on the committee to develop the 2019 new course of study for mathematics.
Awesome. So recently, within a day, it's been voted on to repeal Common Core.
Yes.
Talk about your thoughts on that.
I'm so disappointed. I don't understand why. First of all, they don't trust educators to use our expertise and our professional judgment. These standards expect a lot of Alabama students, but we believe in Alabama students. So that expectation is something that we share. We also did a lot of study and a lot of work with standards in other states, and we took information from them and used what we thought was an improvement. So I was really proud, I still am proud of the 2019 course of study for mathematics. But this bill that's before the Senate now would repeal the Common Core standards, even though we don't really have Common Core standards. We have standards based on the Common Core in ELA and in mathematics. But this bill will remove those standards and send us back to the standards in mathematics in 2003. So I was teaching in 2003, and I realized that those standards were not as rigorous and they didn't demand as much of students as we are demanding now. For example, in the third grade in 2003, there's only one standard around fractions, and it only asks students to model. The standards that are currently there look for third graders to be able to identify equivalent fractions, to talk about what fractions mean part to whole, and to locate them on a number line. And it's that sort of expectation that we believe will make our students competitive in a global economy and have our state in a position to attract industry to our areas.
You know, when you post or you say Common Core on Facebook and on social media, you get a huge reaction of people who just don't like it. Where did that come from?
That is so interesting that you mention that, because the Common Core standards were developed by teachers. And so I read an early version of them, and I was so pleased at how in depth they went. For a long time, our curriculum has been a mile wide and an inch deep. But these standards focused, and they had purpose, and they progressed well. So the progressions were very apparent, and they moved easily from grade level to grade level so that teachers could back down the grade level standards if they had a student who came and needed remediation. So that was one of the things that I loved about them. The other thing I love is that they insist that students make sense of mathematics. I was not a mathematical student when I was a child. I love to read, I love to write. I would have told you I wasn't good at math. It was only when I went back to teach and I discovered these inquiry-based methods where we understood math conceptually and we could talk about math that I could bring my verbal strengths to mathematics. So that's one of the things that I love about these standards, is that they do insist that students talk about math, make sense of math, and that they can talk to peers about math, so that they can critique the reasoning of others, and then they have to justify their own thinking around the mathematics. Teachers say, if you don't believe these standards are effective, come to the classroom. I have teachers all over social media who are saying that they really support these standards and that they don't understand why the senators are even interested in this bill.
Outside of just teaching the kids, what's this going to do for teachers in terms of having to basically go back and have a whole new curriculum, I guess, basically, a whole new set of standards, and then in a couple years you might have a whole other set if they pass something else, it sounds like.
Exactly. So they're sending us back, at least in mathematics. I'm not sure what year ELA will go back to, but we'll go back to 2003. So my teachers will have to learn these standards, and then whenever they determine what the next standards are, I think they call them transitional standards or Alabama core standards, they'll have to do the work with those also. We still, here in Jefferson County, are going to do what's best for students, and that's our focus, is that our students would be proficient in mathematics and that they would be able to make sense of math and feel confident in their ability to be successful.
So, you looking over this proposed bill, what are some the main red flags you've come across?
The fact that they would yank the standards immediately without any sort of transition process, that they would attach this piece of the legislation that says you can't use standards based on national standards, nor can you use assessments that are based on national standards. I have real concerns about the content. I don't know how you determine what is a new or a fresh approach with a math standard when the content hasn't changed.
Do you think this has just become a politicized fight in that people think Common Core is bad and that the politicians in Montgomery have latched onto that and it's become politicized?
I am not sure what people object to about the standards, because those standards that we have that are based on the Common Core standards are just a scaffold. They're a skeleton, if you will, that we flesh out with curricula. So they're just what you build on. They are just the concepts in mathematics. So I think if people who object would come and talk to me, or better yet, read those standards, I think they would see that they are just standards. They are not any particular recipe or direction for teachers to go. Teachers still use their best professional judgment.
Is one of the misconceptions that this is a very rigorous course of study, and what I mean by that is talking with folks down at the UAB School of Education this morning, and talking with somebody else a couple of weeks ago about this, saying yes, there's standards, but there's also flexibility with those standards.
Yes, these standards, they allow teachers to use their own judgment and to make professional decisions about adjusting instruction based on formative assessment. So you can flesh them out as best for your students. And that's what I ask of all my teachers, is that they teach to the students and they teach for students, so that it's a real student-centered focus.
Some of the things you hear is about the new math. Where exactly did that come from?
You know, they were talking about new math in the 1960s. They were talking about new math in the early 1900s. John Dewey came up with new math. He essentially was looking at inquiry, that students should look at those math concepts and make sense of them for themselves, rather than just repeating the steps in a procedure. Because the problem with procedural learning, it is necessary. The problem with just procedural learning is that you don't know when to replicate those procedural steps if you don't know the why. And so that's what we're trying to have students engage in, is the why of the content. Why does that procedure work? And once you know that, then you know when to apply it.
Makes sense. I've heard it explained. Teachers will teach the Common Core way, and then they'll teach kind of the old-fashioned way. And I've heard it said that they're just giving the students the tools, because some students will use the old way and some students will understand the new way. So they're basically saying they teach both like a
It's more of a continuum. I see, and there's no Common Core way exactly. What they're trying to do is allow students to identify the strategies that work best for them personally. So that's why it's really good to have discourse, to have students talking about things. So we expose them to strategies, we let them see alternate methods, and then ultimately we know that the algorithms, what we think of as the traditional way, is the most effective and efficient, generally speaking, not always. I would argue that on a couple of content areas. But what we do is allow those students to choose what makes sense to them. We're not asking that they master a variety of methods. We're not asking that they use those methods that are time-consuming forever. Those methods that are time-consuming, the break-apart methods that you see a lot on social media, they're just so students understand why you break numbers apart, what it means to divide, what it means to think flexibly about the mathematics.
A whole new set of standards coming into 2019 it's looking like this is going to pass through.
Horrors.
What does that mean for teachers? How do teachers pick up the pieces and start a brand new school year without a guideline or without that skeleton to look at?
I think it will be disheartening at first, because they will feel disrespected, as if the work that you've been doing for the past decade was not valued. But I think ultimately, I know ultimately that my teachers here in Jefferson County know that what they do for students is best, and that they do what they do for students every day. And so they'll pick up the pieces and they'll learn new standards and they'll continue to use best practice instruction.
And before we started recording, you were talking about in the bill, it's also repealing students from mandatory taking the ACT.
Well, it says, and I'm not sure, I'm just reading the wording, but it says no assessment that's associated with national standards. And the ACT test is a national assessment. There are also advanced placement courses that I have to be concerned about. If you tell me that I can't use anything that was developed nationally, then I'm worried about what you're asking me not to use.